The Lord be with you. Is that my cue? Who's up for a hike this morning? Anyone? All right. In our imaginations, okay, don't get too eager. Come with me to a village in the Swiss Alps called Gimmelwald. To reach it, we have to take a gondola from the valley floor up over a high ridge, the side of a mountain where the village is nestled. We're surrounded on every side by jagged, snow-capped peaks. Early in our marriage, Jana and I spent a couple nights at a mountain hostel here, and it remains the most stunningly beautiful place I've ever been. We were told on our first night at the hostel that we should follow a trail further up the mountain to even more spectacular views. So the next morning, we laced up our sneakers, and in our youthful confidence, we set out with a spring in our step. We enjoyed the sound of this alpine brook flowing beside us. 1 hour turned to 2, and 2 to 3, and 3 to 4. And Jana began asking, "Andrew, are you sure we're on the right path?" And I assured her, "Oh, for sure. I bet those views they talked about are just up around the next bend." That became my refrain, just around the next bend. But my mansplaining only masked my uncertainty. I didn't really know how far we had to go. I didn't know exactly where we were. I tried to play it cool, but I was getting worried a bit. Our water was nearly gone. We didn't think to bring a map. Our tennis shoes were inadequate, especially when we reached the snow line. And right about then, Jan and I hear this low rumble. And we look to our left, and there's an avalanche on the mountain to our left. I mean, it's a bit of a distance, but if you've heard an avalanche, it doesn't exactly breed confidence, and let's keep going. We may have bitten off more than we could chew. The congregation behind the sermon to the Hebrews is wondering the same thing. They're fatigued from the hike of faith. They're rubbing their aching feet. They're trying to catch their breath. Their lungs are burning from the altitude in this high country of holiness. And they're shaking the last drops of hope from their empty canteens. They didn't expect it to be this hard. As the sermon reaches its climax in chapter 12, the preacher brings the congregation to Mount Sinai, to that all-important mountain in Israel's wilderness hike, where God meets his people, where God gives the law, but also where idolatry is partying around the fire at base camp. Sinai would tower over the people of Israel for generations as the peak of divine perfection, the pinnacle of holy power where God laid down the law in stone, carving his covenant, calling them to obedience. Sinai would also cast a shadow over the people with the memory of their own idolatry and betrayal. Well, the preacher of Hebrews portrays the power of this place, a mountain ablaze with fire, yet concealed with darkness and gloom and storm, rumbling with the untouchable presence of God, whose word is so weighty, it brings a weary and wandering people to their knees. But just as the congregation behind Hebrews feels the mountainous weight of Sinai, the preacher airlifts them out of the wildfire, out of the darkness and gloom, over the storm to a higher mountain, to heavenly Zion, where the sun shines, where angels swing from the chandeliers, where the saints sing with joy. That sounds like a better mountain, don't you think? Let's go there. Let's stay there. But this glimpse of glory, it can leave us with some altitude sickness, lightheaded and laboring for breath. We feel like we can't linger in this high country for long. The preacher tells us, you have not come to Sinai, but you have come to Zion. Really? Have we? Or is it just around the next bend? Just around the next bend. Will it always be just around the next bend? As I recall that hike Jan and I took, what strikes me now is how my attention slowly shifted. When we set off, we couldn't stop talking about the grandeur and glory of the mountains, the majesty of the views, the freshness of the air, the purity of the sun. But as we kept going, my awareness shifted to the uncertainty of where we were going, to the altitude which was making it harder to breathe. And my thoughts turned inward. This trail isn't clearly marked. Why didn't you think to bring a map? What if we run out of water? What if the next avalanche is closer? And with all those swirling in my mind, I began to lose the capacity to see, to really see that we were surrounded by glory on every side, that we were standing higher upon the earth than we'd ever stood before. Where's your attention these days, friends? What are the thoughts clouding your awareness? The spirits of the righteous are at home in Zion, but we're still hiking, where storms move in unannounced, where tragedy strikes like lightning, where wildfires blaze, where darkness settles in, and all the noise of the news risks drowning out the song of joy we were made to sing. Friends, it's understandable that worry would dominate our thoughts. When peace accords fail, when genocides endures, when institutions risk unraveling, when discord and distrust spread like disease all over the world, where relationships break down and bodies begin to fail, it's understandable that worry would occupy our thoughts, that stress would stifle our imaginations. But if these become our center of gravity, we will be pulled down to a valley of despair, and we will end up worshiping idols forged in the fire of our own fears, instead of the living God who calls us to follow. In Psalm 125, the psalmist says, "Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion. They shall not be moved." These words of promise remind us that we are not our worries. We are not the swirl of our judgmental reactions. We are not our fears about the future. We are not consumed by the storm or the fire or the darkness. We, friends, are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. We cannot be moved because on Jesus Christ, the solid rock, we stand. We cannot be moved because Christ is the center of all gravity. He hiked up the Mount of Olives in the darkness. He climbed Golgotha in the gloom. He labored for breath upon Calvary, and his death shook the earth so that our hope might be built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And friends, Jesus' blood, it speaks a better word than fear and vengeance against brother and sister. Because God laid down his life and carved a new covenant in his own flesh. Friends, Jesus is the mediator who makes every mountain meet. Jesus reveals that the God of Sinai is the God of Zion, that the God who spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways has spoken to us in these last days by a Son. By a Son. Jesus is the one who frees us to stand and confess with our Messiah siblings in faith on the other side of the earth. We have known this God, this high God in the darkness. But now we know him in the light. Friends, Jesus frees us from the fear of what storm will roll in, of how long the darkness will linger. Jesus frees us from all that fear and reveals that the trumpet those Hebrews heard at Sinai is the trumpet we hear in Revelation of a risen and reigning King. Jesus reveals that the blazing fire of Sinai is the flame in the eyes of the Son, consuming creation with a holy love that bursts the seed cones of resurrection, transforming us into new creation. Jesus reveals that the hand that holds the scepter of judgment is also the hand that rests upon your shoulder in mercy. And the voice that brought a people to its knees is also the same voice, like the sound of many waters, which says to us, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. Could we ever refuse this voice? The voice of the Lamb who stands upon Zion, who assures us that all our hiking will finally bring us home. Well, obviously, Jan and I found our way back to Gimmelwald, to the village. And when we did, the sun was setting, and we collapsed exhausted on this bench outside the hostel. We kicked off our wet shoes. We caught our breath, and we watched the sun set over the snow-capped mountain peaks. And we were amazed at the majesty that was surrounding us. Friends, if concerns cloud your vision these days, if worries weigh you down, if you've lost sight of the glory in which we live, and if this shaking world has shaken your faith, remember that heaven has been shaken too, from which a king has come and is coming again to bring a kingdom on this earth which cannot be shaken. So take courage. Do not be afraid. Keep hiking, for the Lord is with us. The Spirit is among us, and the Lord will come again in just a little while. And may this good news, this hope, this faith, may it stir in us deeper thanksgiving. May it refine in us a faith that can endure the dark of night and stand the light of day. And may it cause us to lift our eyes to the mountains, to remember where our help truly comes from. Keep hiking, friends. The Lord will lead us home. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.